Episode 7 of Starfleet Academy crammed 3 storylines into a single episode. The Admiral's daughter forged her Academy application, and when she got caught, the punishment was a philosophy lesson. Caleb had a trauma response that he couldn't control, and the show decided he should apologize to someone for it. And Darem spent the entire episode proving he's a leader, only for his partner to rewrite every bit of it in a single scene. Each one of these storylines was resolved by the credits, and each one deserved a better solution. Genesis's motivation is more interesting than the show gives it credit for. She explains it to Caleb directly, and I'll let her say it.
The thing about following someone else's footsteps, everyone will remind you that your ambitions were his first, imply your skills were inherited, and then you just start to wonder if people have been handing you victories just because they recognize those footsteps.
Now that's not insecurity, that's an epistemological crisis. The doubt is structural, it's baked into her backstory. And there's no way to resolve it from inside the system because the system will never tell her the truth. The Chancellor calls her undeniably competent. Her grades are excellent. She probably would have earned her place, and it doesn't matter because her father's name was also on the application, and it almost certainly pushed her through. How much of it was merit and how much of it was her name, Genesis will never know, and neither will we, and that's part of the trap. Not that she doesn't belong, but that she could never prove she does. So she altered her recommendation letters. Every one of them said the same thing, that her excellence was motivated by fear, that she didn't trust she belonged where she was, and she couldn't let that stand, not because it was wrong, but because it was true and she couldn't bear anyone reading it. But here's what makes this tragic instead of criminal. Those letters wouldn't have disqualified her. The Chancellor even says it.
Had it ever occurred to you that they might have done you a favor? Leadership is a battle within yourself. They identified a target for you. There are those who don't find out until it's too late.
The Academy isn't supposed to be a one-track organization. It's built on infinite diversity and infinite combinations. A cadet who's driven by fear isn't rejected. She's exactly the kind of person Starfleet is designed to develop. The letters weren't an obstacle, they were a roadmap. Genesis committed fraud to hide a diagnosis that was trying to help her, and in doing so she proved every word of it right. The fear in the letters said she couldn't trust the system to see her fairly, so what did she do? She didn't trust the system to see her fairly. The fraud is the fear acting on itself. She replaced the diagnosis with a forgery, and in doing so she became the one thing worse than a Nepo baby. She became a fraud. When a command track nomination threatened to expose the altered letters, Genesis manipulated Caleb into breaking into Athena's bridge so that she could hack the database and delete the evidence. Jet Reno caught them, and Genesis confessed. And the Chancellor, to her credit, asked the right question and diagnosed the fear in a single conversation. But then came the punishment: probation and 200 hours of remedial service. Command track was revoked. That's it. Now, here's where it actually matters. This isn't about Genesis. This is about what Starfleet is supposed to be right now. 200 years after the burn, the Federation is rebuilding from scratch. The Academy reopening is a statement to the galaxy that our values survived, that you should trust us again, that these cadets are proof of concept. And every one of them is supposed to embody the argument that Starfleet's standards still mean something. And one of them is a fraud. The Admiral's daughter, no less. The person who is most visible, most symbolic of the old guard carrying forward into the new generation. And her record is fabricated. Not because the truth would have disqualified her, but because she couldn't tolerate being seen accurately. She should have been expelled. Full stop. And here's why it's not even close. Start with the officers who recommended her. Those people put their name on those letters. They staked their professional reputation, their judgment, their word. Genesis altered those letters without their knowledge or consent. She didn't just forge the documents, she tampered with the integrity of every officer who vouched for her. Their words were changed, their assessments were rewritten. They staked their credibility on statements they never made. Then, if we assume that there is an admissions office, every person who reviewed Genesis's application accepted altered documents at face value. Nobody verified. Nobody cross-checked. That's not just a Genesis problem, that's institutional negligence at a time that they can ill afford it. If the system can't vet the next generation of Starfleet officers and catch a simple forgery from a teenager, how can they be expected to extol the same virtues going forward when real tests emerge? Then there's the precedent. Keeping Genesis enrolled in the program after this tells every cadet in the program and every potential member world that fraud is survivable, that the consequences are academic probation or stern talk. In the one era where Starfleet is trying to rebuild its credibility, the institution just established that fabricating your record doesn't end your career. It just costs you a promotion. And if, somehow, expulsion was off the table, there's still a question that the show never asks. Why didn't an admiral's daughter trust her own enrollment? What does it say about the institution that someone with every advantage still felt the system wouldn't evaluate her fairly? That's an alignment problem. That demands a review, not of her, but of the organization. Something is broken if the most privileged cadet in the program believes she needed to cheat to get a fair shake, that her weaknesses would somehow put her at a disadvantage. The show skips all four of these. No expulsion, no review board, no inquiry into how forged documents passed admissions, and no precedent discussion. No institutional self-examination. The secret is just out. And the Federation just told the galaxy that an admiral's daughter who committed fraud gets a second chance. Moving on to Caleb, the focus is on their relationship. Specifically about the 5 minutes that they actually talked to each other when they were hooking up before the Miyazaki mission. During it, a trauma response that Caleb couldn't control surfaced, and Terima, a Betazoid, saw everything that he had been hiding and repressing. Episode 6 handled this fallout well. Terima responded with understanding. It was one of the strongest beats of the entire series, and Episode 7 reopens that wound and loses its nerve. You see, Caleb hasn't spoken to Terima in over a month. She has been moved to Betazoid and is still recovering. He describes what happens with Terima to Genesis.
When we were alone together, she got into my head. Not on purpose, but she saw things I don't tell anybody.
And then it apparently just scared him. At least that is an honest assessment of what happened. Being truly seen, having someone reach the thing you've buried without you choosing to reveal it is terrifying, especially when you've spent your whole life running from it, which Caleb admits that he has. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, since the first episode implies that he spent his whole life dogmatically pursuing his mother. But Caleb is moping, not processing, and the texture of his guilt isn't that it was painful and I'm still dealing with, it is that he hurt her somehow. And Genesis calls it a deflection. The issue isn't the trauma itself, it is the exposure that comes with it. And that's exactly the angle that the episode should have gone with. Instead, it pushes Caleb toward an apology. His final message to Terima at the end of the episode, one that is unprompted, unrequested, and was sent into the silence after a month of no contact from her side, was that you saw the part of me that I tried to pretend doesn't exist, and that I was too freaked out to realize that couldn't have been random. He believes that he presented this memory to her because he wanted her to see him. Now that first part is a beautiful sentiment. The recognition that his subconscious might have reached for a connection even when he was afraid to do so. That is a sophisticated emotional insight. But then he says something weird. I wish I could fix all the mistakes I made with you. And I have to sit here and wonder, what mistakes did you make? Because in the first 5 episodes, you hovered around her, you predated, you stared at her longingly from a distance. In the episode where you finally got together, you have a one-night stand, and then almost immediately everything goes to shit. So what mistake are you talking about? Having a trauma response? Being scared by the fact that it occurred? needing time after the most vulnerable moment in your life. The episode never really identifies a specific mistake because there isn't one to identify, but the show's emotional logic wants to frame it as one, and the apology is presented as a form of growth for this character. The real story was right there in his own words. Caleb wanted to be seen, and now someone is past his walls and they're not going to be able to go back up. Does he accept that a loving empath means being known completely, or does he pull away? It has nothing to do with Tarima hurting him. That is a first contact story happening between two people, and it is Star Trek at its conceptual best. And it was resolved with a voiceover. Now, before we get into the final plot issue with Darem, I want to take a moment to point out what happened with Jaden, because he has a consistency problem in this episode, and the show breezes right past it. Darem's culture practices a pre-wedding abduction ritual. The groom gets snatched before the ceremony. It's some sort of odd tradition, but Jaden doesn't know it, and he follows him through the teleport portal. So the self-described pacifist and the bird watcher charges into the tent holding a boulder over his head, ready to crush someone over a cultural misunderstanding. One episode, when the Furies were killing people on the Miyazaki, when they actually needed a Klingon to smash somebody's head in, this guy cowered in the corner. And while he cowered, the Furies killed a side character who had all of 5 lines this entire series and was more interested in Jaden in every way. That was a life or death situation. People died and Jaden hid, which is fine, because a pacifist freezing under fire is at least consistent with who he says he is. But now he's ready to commit a great act of violence because someone took his friend, his potential romantic interest. The show hasn't even fully defined what Darem means to Jaden, and already the pacifism evaporates. Not when lives are at stake, but when his personal attachment is threatened. Jaden's pacifism only applies when the stakes are abstract. When it's personal, the boulder comes out, and a real pacifist would struggle with that contradiction. Now, the show doesn't even know what they did, and they try to hide behind the label of Darem being an asshole, which they've been pushing since the pilot. Other characters say it plainly. In this very episode, someone calls him essentially an asshole, to his face, framed as affectionate truth-telling. That's the label. Self-interested, abrasive. Now look at what the show actually put on screen. Darem's childhood betrothal to Kaira has been accelerated. Her parents had a health scare and they want to abdicate the throne. He has to leave the academy, leave Starfleet, and return to Kionia. And listen to how he talks about it. He tells Jaden, "I don't want to leave." He admits that the academy has changed him, that he thought it was there to serve him, and he discovered something different. This is a man who found a path and is being asked to abandon it. So what does he do? He commits fully. What I'm not going to do is disappoint Kaira, my parents, my people. I need to be who they raised me to be. He even mentions needing to learn the Constitution, which, as someone in line to marry a princess and co-rule a planet, he probably should have studied years ago. But the fact that he's thinking about it now, in this moment, tells you that he's not going through the motions. He's preparing to actually lead. He doesn't have any self-pity. He's not negotiating his way out of it. He puts on the mantle, literally a royal sealing garment, while trying to calm Jaden down, who's panicking about the cold. He walks into the ceremony, and when Jaden pushes back, Darem's response is simple: "My people need me." Now this is what true leadership looks like. Not someone who wants power, someone who accepts it reluctantly because the people who need him matter more than the life he'd rather be living. That reluctance isn't weakness. It's the thing that makes you want this person in a position of authority. He's an idealization of what a leader should be, and the show wrote him that way by accident. Jaden's cosine toast at the ceiling is the centerpiece, and it's worth sitting with, because the show wrote it sincerely. Jaden says he never knew this side of Darem before today, that first impressions had been rocky, that none of them understood how Darem could be so confident and so brave. But then he describes what he actually saw. A man who pushed himself to see himself honestly, to use his voice, whose counsel was harsh at times, but told Jaden that Darem is someone who cares, a man in service of something greater than himself, who puts others first, who will always choose to set himself aside and favor another person's need above his own. The camera lingers, the music swells. It plays as a genuine moment, and nothing in the speech contradicts what we've watched across the season. Kira pulls Darem aside. She says that Jaden's toast was very beautiful. The man he described as someone that she has never met. And for about 5 seconds, this is wonderful. It is set up to read as Kaira seeing Darem for the first time. And I mean really seeing him. Recognizing that the Academy has unlocked something in him that she never knew was there. And when she tells him to step down, to let her rule alone, it plays as an act of love. She is putting his needs above her own, releasing him so that he can stay on the path that has made him into this person. That should be a beautiful beat. A woman who cares enough about her partner and her people to make a sacrifice of her own. And then the show hits the gas. At breakneck speed, Kira rewrites the entire moment. She tells Darem he was always quiet, always one step behind her his entire life. She says that the Academy showed him a different path. And then she accuses him. She says that he started their life together with a lie by not telling her that he'd changed, that his growth was her own grievance. His transformation becomes deception. She doesn't just release him from the throne, she kicks him off of it, and she ascends alone. She even points out that no woman has ever ruled by herself and that she is going to be the first. In 5 seconds, this scene pivots from genuine selflessness to girl boss coronation. Everything stops being about Darem and starts being about Kira. His sacrifice, his reluctance, his commitment, all of it becomes backdrop for her moment. The show wants her to be strong because that's what Hollywood is pushing. And the fastest way to get there was to tear down the man standing next to it. The man that had been sacrificing his entire life to make sure his people were taken care of. The man who is showing genuine competency, is showing a new side of himself that would only be a benefit to her people. Kira's accusation that he lied by not telling her he changed doesn't survive contact with everything that we just watched. You can't lie about a transformation if you haven't had time to evaluate yourself. Darem may not even have seen his own growth until Jaden pointed it out for him. Jaden had to catalog it in the toast before anyone in the room could name what had happened. And the trait Kira says she's never seen, selflessness, he's demonstrating it at that very moment. The entire sacrifice we just watched, the traits must have always been there. The Academy couldn't have created those traits. It just gave them a stage where other people could recognize them. The evidence is literally standing in front of her in a sealing garment and preparing to rule a planet. This is less deception and more of who he has always been, but she has chosen not to see. Now, you would think that this would hit pretty hard, but moments later, after returning to Starfleet Academy, his classmates return and call him an asshole. The label wins out. The evidence doesn't matter. In a 10-episode season, you don't have episodes to waste. Every hour has to be load-bearing. And this wasn't filler. It was the opposite. The show had too much story and not enough time to tell it. Any one of these stories could have held an hour-long episode in any of the previous series. Genesis's fraud and the institutional reckoning that it demanded would have made a full episode of DS9. Caleb processing what it means to be known by an empath would have made an excellent bottle episode within the next generation. Darem's reluctant ascension to a throne he doesn't want would have made a great Voyager away mission. These are all full-length premises. Each one has the dramatic weight to carry the episode, and this show burned all 3 of them in an hour, in a season that only has 10 hours. There's a pattern connecting all 3 of these storylines. The writer's room consistently choose the emotionally convenient version of each scene over the dramatically honest one. Confession meets compassion instead of consequence. Trauma gets repackaged as guilt. Demonstrated leadership gets overridden by assertion. Pacifism bends for a comedy beat. Every time a scene reached the point where it could get genuinely uncomfortable, where a character or an institution might have to reckon with something real, the show releases the pressure. And this post-burn setting should be a pressure cooker. It should be squeezing these characters until the truth comes out. Instead, the release valve opens every time someone starts to sweat. But there are 3 episodes left. And the stories that could only work in Star Trek, the ones that are justified, this show's existence in the post-burn timeline, are already closed, wrapped in life lessons, resolved by voiceover, dismissed by characters the show sided with over its own evidence. The ideas were there. The season just didn't have enough respect for them to let them breathe. But this is Second Draft. That's what I have on this episode, and I'll see you for the next one.